You're watching Capital Connection from the Illinois State Capitol.
Critics were quick to pounce on the Illinois Senate passing that massive energy bill late Tuesday night, calling it another big bailout for Exelon. That lingering cloud of the ComEd corruption case was a major obstacle for politicians to cobble that deal together in the first place, in part because of that public appearance or that image issue, the optics of allowing ComEd to raise electric rates for its customers while handing its parent company another big massive bailout worth nearly $700 million. In many ways, the power players from that deal are gone. ComEd cleaning house of its lobbyists, and the State House getting rid of former House Speaker Michael Madigan, forcing him out from his post at the top of the House. He would resign shortly thereafter. Many of his former allies and old pals in the State House who were on the payroll at ComEd also out of that company as they are now fighting those federal corruption charges. But the game itself still looks very much the same in terms of leverage. Exelon knows that the lawmakers need them to stay supplying energy to the grid in the short term to build that bridge to the clean energy future. We had some loud criticism on the floor of the Senate, especially from Senator Darren Bailey, state senator who's running for governor in the Republican primary in 2022. He called it a ransom payment, essentially, for Exelon at the expense of taxpayers, comparing Exelon to a, quote, corrupt crony corporate crime syndicate.
We've been threatened and pushed around by a corporation that has admitted to criminal wrongdoing. Do we stand up to them? Do we stand up for the workers in this state? Do we stand up to the ratepayers to ensure that their family budgets are not stretched too thin? No. We fold and reward corrupt corporations with multi-million-dollar bailouts and tell working families that they get to pay for it.
Joining us now is David Kraft, from the director at the Nuclear Energy Information Services, covering and sort of watching closely some of the nuclear energy policy. David, good to have you with us.
Thanks for the opportunity, Mark.
I want to ask you first on how do you evaluate, and you're coming from the perspective of someone who believes there should be no nuclear power, is that right?
Yes, NEIS is a 40-year-old organization. We're a safe energy advocacy group and nuclear power watchdog. So we've been following ever since the days it was ComEd when the reactors were being built, all the way through the Unicom phase to the Exelon phase we have now.
Okay, so we'll get into some of the ramifications and ideas around that in a minute. But first, how do you understand Exelon's, or how would you describe Exelon's sort of corporate maneuvers here? They've put out in their own press releases plans to spin off the nuclear side. Part of that involved taking on more debt recently, and now here we're in a position where the company is going to Congress and going to state legislatures here in Springfield asking for a lot of taxpayer money. How do you evaluate the necessity for those funds?
Yeah, it's a very unique situation, Mark. It's coming in this age of bailouts, both at the state level and at the federal level. You have a company which has not just a history with nuclear power, but perhaps the history with nuclear power in the nation, suddenly deciding it wants it both ways. On the one hand, it's advocating for bailouts, saying how essential nuclear power is, and at the same time spinning it off to a company which would separate itself through perhaps LLCs that would be set up to run the reactors here in Illinois. So it's kind of a double message where they're saying on the one hand, this is a vital industry and we're behind it, yet go away so it doesn't affect our bottom line.
Well, did you read that more as I was reading some of the publications from your group there? Did you read it more as Exelon trying to wash its hands of the corruption scandal? Or as sort of a corporate restructuring to have higher profit margins or returns for shareholders, some combination of both?
Yeah, I'd say it's a combination of both, but primarily Exelon doesn't act unless there's something in its financial interest. So I think primarily we are looking at a financial thing here. They really aren't sure what's going to happen either at the state level with the $700 million bailout that Pritzker has proposed, and it has not passed yet, or the potential $46 billion bailout that's being bandied about in the reconciliation package in Washington. They want to make their company as financially solid, so they're spinning off assets which don't bring in the money. It's interesting to note, too, though, that since March, which was prior to their annual meeting, their stock value is around $39 a share. As of today, when we're doing this interview, it's over $50 a share. So clearly, this message to the market that they're trying to reduce, unprofitable assets is paying off for them.
I wonder, though, you'd be fine with them getting $0 in state funding, if I understand your position correctly. But
we have advocated that it's the nuclear communities and the nuclear workers who deserve the bailouts, because they're the ones going to be affected if the plants close. Exelon's a profitable corporation which could shift assets around if they really felt that these nuclear reactors were either going to make money in the future or if they were essential, and they're neither.
I guess the question is, so they're telling us, Exelon is telling the public, if they don't get this $700 million, roughly $694 million from Illinois, they're going to have to close 2 or 3 of their plants, one of them as soon as 2 weeks from now.
That's correct.
If they start to do that, the environmentalists say, look, nuclear power does not emit carbon. It's not as imminent a danger to the climate by spewing, heat-trapping gases into the skies at the rate that coal or natural gas does. If you take away nuclear power and start to close these plants, don't you invite grid instability? Don't you blow up that bridge to a cleaner energy future?
If nuclear is a bridge to the future, it's made out of balsa wood and it's manufactured by termites. Yes, there would perhaps be a very immediate effect in terms of carbon emissions because the state has stupidly not engaged in aggressive build-outs of renewable energy. And part of the reason for that is because of actions of Exelon and the Michael Madigan reign of error over the last 5-6 years. We could have had a much larger build-out of renewables, not gas, not coal, which could have made up the delta between a plant closure and what is needed. The second thing is, though, that PJM, the market operator here in Illinois, has gone public over and over again saying there will not be any system reliability if these reactors close. There's plenty of power in the PJM system, and if need be, and I'm not saying it would happen, but if need be, there's energy that can be imported within this region. So the lights aren't going to go out. The system reliability will not be affected. Those are red herrings, and they're patently they're falsehoods. And
there are issues that come up often as these policies are debated here in these halls and beyond. In Congress, that's something going on right now too. How do you have a read on, I know your group looks at some of the policies coming from Washington too. One of the things lawmakers in this building have been trying to get a better grasp on is just how the infrastructure bill might provide some rate of subsidy or taxpayer support for nuclear power plants. Do you have a read on how that infrastructure bill, again, if it can clear the House, what it would do for nuclear power plants?
Sure. Yeah, there are 2 different bills to take a look at. The actual infrastructure bill, which was a $1.5 trillion bill, had a package worth roughly $12 billion to the nuclear industry, half of which would potentially be allocated to bailing out failing nuclear plants like we have here in Illinois. The reconciliation package, though, that's the $3.5 trillion bill, I always get the billions and trillions confused, has roughly $46 billion calculated and allocated towards nuclear power in all different forms. Interestingly enough, the champion of that part of the reconciliation bill, Ben Cardin of Maryland, is also happened to get $80,000 worth of campaign contributions from IBEW and Exelon Corporation over the last 5 years. So if we thought that the Illinois situation is tainted with any kind of political corruption, make no mistake, Washington also has its pork interests involved here as well. Now,
campaign contributions, I mean, those are legal. Campaign contributions are legal, and certainly there is the appearance that it influences the way a member votes, but that money, those are legal contributions.
Sure, they're perfectly legal, and of course they would never affect a legislator's line of thinking now, would they?
I suspect a bit of sarcasm in that statement.
There's lots of sarcasm there. No, seriously though, the main recipients of the reconciliation package turns out to be Exelon Corporation and Energy Harbor, First Energy, which used to be First Energy in Ohio. And they would get roughly 60% of those funds allocated their way. Now, these are the 2 corporations that are currently tainted by FBI investigations, political scandals, indictments, and the booting out of the speakers of both houses in Ohio and in Illinois. So it's pretty clear that bailouts in any form seem to have a direct link to the level of corruption that goes on within the nuclear industry and how funds are allocated.
There's a look at the contrarian perspective. You mentioned earlier that because Illinois has, I think in your words, you said stupidly not built out more aggressively renewable options. But here we are today. We can always look at the past. We can judge financial decisions the state has made in the past. We can look at a whole lot of things that we know now through the lens of history we didn't get exactly right. The question that this legislature faces is where to go from here. And almost everyone that is close to the energy environment discussion, experts, academics, people that are in the industry and those observers just on the periphery of it say if you get rid of nuclear now, if you close nuclear now, you're going to only embolden, empower, and enrich coal and natural gas and give them that access because they're the only ones with that immediate access to go to the market and say we can supply more energy a lot faster than you can stand up these wind turbines and install these solar panels. I mean, how is that smart policy?
Well, we would question some of the assumptions that you just threw out. You can turn up a wind farm in 2 to 3 years. It takes 10 to 12 years to build a nuclear plant. Not that anybody's proposing it because they're money losers. But you're right, and as I said earlier, in the immediate term, which might be the next 2 or 3 years, there could be this problem where, just like in Germany, when they closed the nuclear plants, there was an uptick in the use of fossil fuels, which resulted in a increase in carbon emissions. But the point is, it's just as connected that the longer you retain a nuclear industry that is money losing and has to keep coming back for bailouts, that's money that's not going to be put into renewable energy, first of all. And secondly, it's going to have a market share which kind of crowds out the introduction of new renewables. So you have a double whammy there and a self-fulfilling prophecy, not sound energy policy.
And certainly people are skeptical, or at least watching with a guarded eye of how Exelon might use that money as they are making some of these maneuvers and trying to win the favor and the approval of the SEC as they restructure their corporation there. David Kraft, a watchdog of the nuclear energy sector, thanks for joining us.
Appreciate the opportunity. Stay well. Thank you.
Democrats remain divided on how to use the political power they've amassed here in Springfield with supermajorities in both chambers, especially over this divisive and controversial energy policy. But the one thing they did agree on earlier this week was to protect that power, if they could, through the use of drawing political maps. When we come back, an independent analyst and a redistricting expert breaks down the gerrymandering in these new maps to help us get a better sense of what that might mean for politics in Illinois over the next decade. We're back in a moment.